Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of MTG Study Hall Quarantine Edition. I, as always, am your host, Brett, and I am joined by JC, Lily, and Dave. I've also got Tam on the mic, and before we launch into the show for you today, we've got a little bit of bookkeeping to take care of. Tam, you want to take that away for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So if you like the show and you want to go out and support us, go to patreon.com/TCGU University. Toss us a couple bucks, get some exclusive perks like access to the live show, as well as access to our Discord, as well as a myriad of other things to have. But if you don't have any bucks to toss, that's totally chill. You can go out to youtube.com/TCG University. Subscribe, follow out there, and catch everything that we do live about a week later. As well as catch us on our other social medias, Twitch as well as Facebook, both at TCG University to get access to a bunch of other content. But a big shout out to our Patreon sponsors. We've got Addie, Andrew Dang, Anthony Albino, Bryce Rathsack, Chris Miner, Clay Cardwell, Jay Rogers, Jarrett Hubbard, John Stone, Justin Farce, Kat Maria, Kevin Broberg, Lucinda Letica, Andrew, Paul Casagrande, Peyton Kiker, Samantha Stevens, the baddest bitch around, Teodoro Ruiz, Tyler Zane Pease, as well as big shout outs to our sponsors for this episode, Nuclear Inked Custom Tattoo and Skate Shop, Cards Custom Build, Ink Gaming, and Dex Protection.
Okay, that's it. That's everything. All right. Man, you get real good at that, Tam. You're like the guy at the end of the radio commercials who tells me how the drugs are going to kill me secretly. So
I get to do it at least twice a week.
You're getting real good at that. Before we launch into it, which we've got a lot to cover today, I want to talk about what we've been doing inside of Magic. Lily, what have you been doing in Magic this past week?
Oh, Lord. I got the first draft of that set finished.
Which I have sitting in my inbox. I have not gotten a chance to look yet.
60 cards.
160?
260.
Oh, Lord. Oh, God. I don't have to read.
I'll share you on it, JC, if you care.
I do care. Please do.
Okay, I'm assuming that's probably taking up most of your Magic time.
I just do it at work.
I'm not going to tell. JC, what have you been doing?
Oh, just playing a little online, and also I stumbled on a cool thing that I want to share with everyone. It's a website called Art of MTG, and it's just ARTOF MTG, and they have a Facebook page as well. And all they do is exclusively write stories and share large-size pictures of the art of Magic the Gathering. And their Facebook and Twitter accounts, all they do is they highlight some art every single day. Like, not every day, but they every week, I would say, or something like that. Like, they often. But yeah, like, all their posts are just like highlighting amazing art. They just go through and, post art and talk about the artists and cover stories of them. So I definitely recommend, if you are like me and you play Magic a lot because you love the art, check it out.
Okay, that sounds really cool. I need to make Twitter happen in my life because there's people whose opinions I care about on that. So no, I might check that out. Dave, what's been happening?
I've been taking somewhat of a break, feeling a little bit of burnout, but almost to be expected. I'm eagerly awaiting the information as far as what's getting banned and the rationale for that, because obviously we were talking a lot in the pre-show about that. I'm kind of curious to see whether or not speculation's right, or what we have on the horizon, as well as waiting for my collector booster tomorrow.
Yes, and so as for me, did Brawl with Brett yesterday, had a good time, built Kenrith 5-color stuff, and had an okay run of things, had a fun time, had some really nice games, and so you can check out the VOD on that, where I actually build the deck. It's actually a lot of fun because people in the comments throw stuff in and helped out and heckled, and so that was a lot of fun. I too am picking up some Magic product tomorrow. I'm very excited to get my hands on it. I bought a lot of paper product, so maybe doing a little bit pretending to having our own little pre-release here in my house. Got a couple of the pre-release kits, got some boxes, all the commander decks, a lot of stuff. I have a lot of stuff coming tomorrow, so very much looking forward to getting to play with some paper Ikoria. So we've got a lot to cover in our next first topic here, so I want to get rolling on that. And so what we're going to discuss is Tam pitched this actually today before the episode started, and we all really liked the idea. And so we want to talk about each of the Magic formats and kind of how to get into them. And so I was going to ask you guys, how do we want to start? Because if we're going to talk about the best way to get into the formats, it might be best to start with standard and work our way out, as opposed to starting with vintage. Because
I think that's a good idea.
So, does somebody want to start? So, standard, very quickly is, or do we want? Technically, we should talk about limited formats, right?
Yeah. So first, we start with limited and work our way out from there.
Okay. You want to start with limited?
Yeah, so limited refers to generally two kinds of formats, draft and sealed. More draft gets played later. Sealed gets played right when the set comes out, and it's the preferred format of pre-releases. Sealed is where you're given a certain number of packs, usually around 6, and then you have time to construct your deck of 40 cards from the cards that you open in your pool. It's a sealed pool is how it's referred to. Then you play in a tournament with people who also built their decks right then and there. And depending on how big the tournament is, sometimes it'll go like a number of different rounds, 3, 4, 5. I mean, it usually goes a lot of rounds. Sealed is normally played at tournaments. And that's the thing that makes it a little different than other formats. Draft is played sometimes at tournaments, but usually with smaller groups of people where everybody, usually around 8, will have 3 packs each, and they will open the pack, pick a card, and pass it to the next person that goes clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise with the 3 packs. And then each of you build your decks out of the pool of cards you drafted. The thing that makes draft different than sealed is that in the draft pool is like all the packs that everyone opens. So everyone's kind of playing from the same group of 24 packs. Yeah, 24 packs that have been opened, whereas sealed, there's not really, people's decks don't have anything to do with one another's generally. So draft tends to be a little more level as far as like luck-wise, whereas sealed can be all over the place. But both of those are 40 cards, and they're usually played explicitly for the purpose of competing with the other people who are playing the format.
I do want to point out the expectation too that in pre-releases you will have players of all skill levels. As long as they really like Magic, you'll have a lot of beginners, a lot of people who don't know the format very well, a lot of people who don't know not the format, the cards very well. They haven't like heavily researched it and stuff like that. And you'll have people who are really good and have researched the things that are coming out and stuff too. But like, it's a very accessible environment if you're a new player to play in a pre-release. I think it's a good place to start.
Or even just a casual sealed one. There's nothing stopping you from you and a few friends grabbing a box. It's actually one of the easiest ways if you get a box and you don't 8 people in a draft is pretty easy with a box. But if you're just buying packs with a group of friends, it's actually a pretty good way to start. One thing I do want to mention very briefly, you do get to use any number of basic lands in both of these formats, so you don't have to draft.
That's important.
Because one time I was in a draft where someone didn't know that rule and kept taking the basic lands thinking he needed those and really messed his deck up, which was a huge bummer. So just want to throw that out there in case someone doesn't know.
So sealed, like JC was saying, is a little more new player friendly in a lot of ways, or people who don't know the set very well friendly in a lot of ways, because you're only having to worry about building the best stack about the cards that you currently have. Whereas draft requires a little more knowledge of the set that you are drafting.
Yes, drafting is a both of them are limited formats. Draft is a little more skill intensive because there's not only is it important to know the archetypes and know the general directions that the set can go, but you also, if you want to work on higher tier, there's some higher tier levels of skills that are involved with draft with things like signaling. So you need to, at higher levels, you're thinking about what colors and kinds of cards you're passing to your opponents, what that will likely mean in later stages of the draft when they're then passing you cards from different packs. Considering that if you want a card, how likely is it to maybe, it's called wheeling a card, where if you say, maybe this card will not get picked in the next 7 picks after I pick a card, so maybe this will come back to me and I can get it. So drafting is certainly more complicated and is the more skill-intensive version of the two ways to play. But honestly, I think people should be, I think players should play more limited. I think a lot of times you don't see that much. Sealed happens at pre-releases, and that can kind of be intimidating for new players. I think Sealed should start happening really early on when somebody learns the games. Like, learn the basics, obviously, get handed a deck. The intro decks are great little things. Learn the baseline mechanics, maybe play some Planeswalker decks or some simple decks together. But once you've done that, I think the deck building aspect of Sealed is a great like little window into like, I can show you the world of what can be. Instead of worrying about every card that exists and how to get all of them, here are 6 packs. Build the best deck you can out of these 6 packs. So I think it starts teaching good skills early. So I'm actually a huge proponent of new players playing Sealed. I think it is actually one of the best ways to get into the game once you've learned the basics.
You also don't have to worry about having to choose between picking a card that you really like and want for your collection and picking the card that's best for your deck. When I was a new player, I played a lot of draft, and I would force the thing I wanted to play every time, and it was not good for my collection, and it was not like, it made me feel a little like, I don't know. So with like Sealed, you don't have to like have that tension. A lot of times new players and even experienced players will be like, I really want to have this card, but I also want this other card in the pack for my deck. You don't have to worry about that, and that's hard. Like that's always a hard decision to make.
No, absolutely. And something also that I also want to say is I talked about Sealed being simpler than draft, but at the same time, I think new players should also really try to jump into drafts as well. I think if I look back on my Magic career, my most precipitous jump in skill as a player was when I was drafting every week. You will lose a fair amount, but you get to pick the cards you want to pick. So that's one of the nice things is if you open the packs and they're like, oh, here's a great card. Hey, you got an awesome card. You got a cool foil. You got something you've been wanting. That's enough. Now, yeah, you might lose, you might win. There's a lot of different, maybe you're just playing with some friends and so there's nothing on the line, or maybe you're playing, the winner will get a certain amount of packs. But really, I think it's not as intimidating as I might have actually made it seem a little bit. Just pick a color or 2 colors, make sure you draft enough creatures, try to grab some removal. There are some really simple mantras and basic drafting skills that I think we should actually cover in a later episode. There's the bread idea. There's quadrant.
We can do a whole episode on draft.
I would love to do a draft episode where we talk about quadrant drafting and bread.
We could also touch on cube when we do that, but that we should save that stuff for that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. But yeah, those are that's go ahead.
Oh yeah, no. Dave, did you have anything to add on drafting or Sealed?
Oh, I think kind of. I would say that it would probably be better for a newer player to learn via Sealed and play a lot more via Sealed. And the main reason for that is one of the more frustrating things I remember when playing a lot of single elimination, like 8-man drafts, is signaling is just borderline impossible in certain instances, especially with newer players. They're going to have a lot rougher of a time where they open up this really awesome, cool white rare and they take it. And then they're in white. And then they pass the person to their left 3 pacifisms. And so I thought that they weren't in white. Yeah, just kind of along those lines, that getting an idea of card evaluation is generally a little bit easier if you're going through Sealed, where you're like, well, I mean, here are the 6 packs that I have to work with. What are the good cards? What are the bad cards? Why are they good? Why are they bad? And then you can kind of transition that a little bit more into draft from there. That way you kind of have a better idea if someone starts passing you a bunch of lightning bolts or pacifisms, or somebody passes you even 1 fireball, you go, oh shit, this color's open, cool.
I would do a whole episode on draft.
And I just want to point out one last thing about drafting and Sealed is I think you get to play with more of the cards in those formats than any other format. You get to play with, people like to call it chaff. You get to play with some cards that you would never play with in Standard, and I think it opens up more of the options of what you get to play with, and you just get to see more of it. And if you're a person like me who just loves the art and stuff like that, sometimes they place the best art on the worst fucking cards.
Yeah,
so like.
No, yeah, it's fun. It's fun. No, it's fun to play with your cards. And actually, this is Cat doesn't play that much limited, and I'm always like, no. we have these 6-packs of Battle Bond. I know it's tempting to crack them open, but if we crack them open, we'll look at the 6 of the cards in the pack, go, that's exciting. I might play some of these in Commander, sort them into a box, and then be done. But if we play with them, we get to play with basically every card in here. And I'm a firm believer that the professor over at Tolarian Community College is always talking about if you're buying booster packs, you should really try to play with your booster packs. That's the point of booster packs. And so I'm a big proponent of try it out. And it's not for everyone. So if you like opening booster packs, I'm not here to shame you or anything. But really, it is a very fun way to play. You got to play with way more cards. Somebody said a really interesting thing. I was reading a very in-depth draft article. And Wizards oftentimes doesn't print cards that aren't playable and at least sealed anymore. I can't think of a single card in Ikoria that I can't think of one card that there's not a scenario in sealed or draft that I wouldn't maybe put in my deck. And I think that's really cool that there are 250 some cards that I get to play with. There's 250 some pieces, unique pieces in every draft. And that's at least that's really cool.
It feels like cycling is kind of cheating though.
Yeah.
Like playability. Because there are a lot of cards that are just stone unplayable, but they have cycling. So okay, if I'm playing the Kraken enchantment, or I have the lion, the Boros lion that shocks something and I gain life. Okay, yeah, this card's a little bit more playable, but
okay, that's fair. I might be cheating a little bit saying that I can't think of a card in Ikoria. That's fair, but it's just exciting. And JC brings up a very good point of getting to play with all those other cards when maybe there's not another opportunity to jam Almighty Brushwag and appreciate how fucking awesome that card is.
Yeah, a lot of formats to touch on kids.
Yes.
Or or my literal favorite card, Loathsome Chimera. Oh, that card. Anyway.
Okay.
Onward.
So that's
Limited, draft and sealed.
And that's how you get into it. Dave, do you want to do a little spiel on Standard?
yeah, absolutely. Standard is I guess the best way to describe it would be the showcase that WotC has to show the new product. This is, it's the last 2 years worth of sets. It used to be called Type 2. There's a lot of naming changes and all that, but Standard's a bit more of a fitting term. Obviously, it's called Standard because that's the constructed format people go to first. It's the Standard.
By design.
Yeah, cute name. It helps them sell product. You get to see all the new things. And since there's a rotation, there's less of a concern that you're going to have a big enough card pool that problems start emerging. Obviously, that's kind of been a thing recently in the last couple of years where the power level has been kind of pushed to the point where things are a problem without an extended card pool, among various other changes to how the rotation works. But if you want to get into constructed, Standard's the place to start first. Despite the fact that there are those yearly rotations and some of your cards may get invalidated at a certain point, it's still a small enough card pool so that newer players aren't really having to deal with a complexity creep or anything like that.
So I want to touch on something here. Dave used the word constructed there. Constructed is specifically as opposed to limited, where constructed is like you come with whatever cards you're going to be playing with. Limited is you build with the cards that you open at the event.
So first, draft sealed, limited. Everything else we're going to touch on today is constructed.
Nearly.
So that's the first kind of branching thing. And a nice thing about Standard is, let's say, if you're watching this and you're curious, how do I get into these formats? You're new, you know how to play the game, you don't know where to go, play some sealed. And then maybe you go up to draft, maybe you stick with sealed, you find what you like. But now you're starting to get those cards. Generally speaking, when people are playing draft and sealed, they're playing with Standard sets. And so you can start to develop that collection and you can go into Standard. And so, like Dave said, last 2 years of sets, every September, the oldest 4 sets, the oldest year's worth of sets fall off, and Standard goes from having 8 sets in it to having 5 sets go into it, because those 4 sets come off when the fall set comes out.
Yep, that's Little Standard.
That's Little Standard, so you go from the biggest Standard there is down to Little Standard. And then, so you're playing with that the last 2 years or year and a quarter's worth of cards. And the best way to get into it, if you're playing limited and you're developing that collection, maybe you did a couple pre-releases, you're starting to get those cards. You can say, what decks am I close to? Another thing they do is they've been putting out some really nice, they're not event decks. What are they called? What are those challenger decks? They're the challenger decks. So they put out some challenger decks.
normally those have pretty decent value because there are a couple of rares and or mythics that are seeing a decent amount of constructed play that are up there. I think one of the previous ones had Hazoret, when Hazoret was one of the best cards in the format, in one of the best decks, as much as it pains me to call mono red best deck. But
that deck was awesome. You watched your mouth.
Sure,
oh my God, that deck was
your Hazorets
awesome.
and your 3/3s for 3.
And Chandra, don't forget Torch of Defiance. Oh my God.
It's also worth mentioning here that not right now because plague, but under normal circumstances, or at least until March of 2020, most game stores in most places would regularly host drafts and standard.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have like a play group or people to play with and you want to get into this and start playing in person with people, you could at least historically go to a game store on a Friday night, a weeknight, and play one of those two formats there, almost certainly.
And actually something I wanted to mention that covers this and the last two, if you're playing with Arena, which is what I'm always, if you have a computer capable of playing Arena and you want to learn Magic or play more Magic, I really recommend Arena as a great starting point, even if you do want to get into paper. And on Arena, you are able to play sealed and draft events, and the main format available on Arena is standard. And so that's another way to, there's another place that's the primary format they want you playing and expect you to be playing on Arena. So, and that's often generally been where we've been getting the big tournaments. If you're watching like the World Championship, they've been playing a lot of standard because they've been using the Arena client to do that. So there's a lot of standard, there's a lot written about it, a lot of opportunities.
Brett, talk about Brawl.
Do we want to? Brawl's kind of an offshoot.
Brawl's the format. It's a format offshoot of standard.
Before we get off standard, I just want to put a period on one thing real quick about standard. Is that it is a really good place to learn Magic as it sits right now, because like you don't have to be intimidated or necessarily learn about old rulings, old keywords, old styles of Magic. You don't have to be concerned with the history of Magic to play standard. So it's a less intimidating place to get into Magic. So
that's a good point. You don't have to say, so here's what Bushido does, here's what sweep does, here's what flanking does. There's a certain amount of complexity. There's an upper limit on complexity that Wizards wants to put into standard. And so the cards going into standard, some of them are not as complicated as old cards in general. And when they do certain more complicated things, like say the mutate mechanic in Ikoria is particularly complicated, they will then endeavor to lower complexity in other places in the set. So there's kind of a certain amount of complexity present in the format, and you'll only need to learn a certain amount of mechanics or a certain amount of interactions before you can start saying, I'm pretty proficient in this format. I saw a couple green things flashing up. I don't know if that's just other noises or if Dave, do you have something you want to say? I see the green.
My mic is kind of sensitive and I don't have it on push to talk. But
okay.
I mean, the complexity creep, and we could go on a topic for another time, but Time Spiral was one of my favorite sets, blocks. And I don't know offhand, but I believe it's about 90 keywords are in that block. And it is
that
not
seems
a good
low.
It's like some of them are like one-off, like wizard cycling they count, and it's just a bunch of wacky stuff. And some things they haven't used since, things they won't use again, some things they decided to use immediately afterwards in the next block.
Fortifications.
Like didn't they end up? No, the fortifications are land.
No, it's just Darksteel Citadel, right? Or Darksteel
Garrison.
Oh God, Garrison. Yeah.
So normally standard doesn't have a whole lot of things to look
Oh
at.
God. So that was the set that sparked New World Order.
Which is probably a good thing. I mean, I'm definitely a sadist, and I really enjoy those things. Like I like watching somebody go, "Oh shit, I didn't know what that keyword right now." You know, I personally liked it. I love playing that draft format too. But I know I'm in the minority on that. It's probably a good thing that they're not going to put that into standard again. If they do it again, they're going to end up doing it as a master set.
Yeah, and I actually wrote New World Order down on the future topic sticky notes because that sounds like an awesome topic.
Make sure you do one while I'm still on the show because that's a design thing.
Yeah,
if we're doing a New World Order, I'm going to alternate between impressions of Alex Jones and Bill Cooper. You're all welcome.
Okay.
Primarily Bill Cooper, but that's a whole different. That's something for the post show.
Lord in heaven. Okay. So okay, I think actually the Brawl's a good point. So we're gonna move on from standard. That's standard. Standard's not too difficult to get into. It can be a little pricey at times, but generally we live in a world where there's cheaper and more expensive decks. As of right now, there is a very cheap standard deck in the Boro Cycling. So hopefully you're coming into standard in a place where there's some money, where there's some various price options depending on the amount of money you're willing to spend on standard. But that is how you get into standard very quickly. Brawl. So we'll get to Commander in a bit. Commander did come first in the order of time, but Commander is a format that uses the same card pool as standard.
Brawl is a format that uses.
Excuse me. Brawl is a format that uses the same pool as standard.
It has a few others, right?
Yes, there are a couple. A handful of additional cards. No, yeah, that's a very good point, Dave.
I actually have no idea if Command Tower is legal in standard or not. I think it might technically be legal, but it doesn't do anything.
No, it is legal in standard. It is legal in standard. Yeah, it's pointless but legal. Yeah. As is Arcane Signet.
Show how cool you are. It's just a flex. It's a flex.
It is a 2-mana artifact that if you wanted to need that for some reason, you've got it. So
and you could activate its ability and choose nothing.
So
wait, no, you can't activate it. Never mind.
Anyway, so okay. So standard card pool. And you pick a legendary creature or legendary planeswalker. They are your commander, and then you need to build your 60-card brawl deck. All the cards need to be colorless or or have the same colors or share a color with your commander. So very quickly, if your commander is red, white, and blue, all the cards in your deck need to be red, white, and or blue. You can't run any black cards and you can't run any green cards. And that's actually, it's slightly different color. It's called color identity. So your cards can only have red, white, and blue mana symbols on them. So we've done other episodes on Commander, and we can certainly go into that in more depth. But Brawl is another format that's available on Arena. It is another fun format if you're a newer player, and it's pretty easy to get into. It's even easier to get into Standard, because once you've maybe bought a box of cards, you've been buying packs to open either for fun or to play limited, you've built up a small collection, it's pretty easy to throw a Brawl deck together for pretty cheap, and Brawl is made to be played both one-on-one and in multiplayer. The rules are a little bit different than a traditional Standard game. The life totals are different, but all that's available. Information is readily available on Wizard's site. So Brawl is kind of a little offshoot of Standard that I am a huge fan of because I play it once a week. So that is Brawl.
Brawl also has an important difference. It's a singleton format.
Yes, that's obviously. Yeah, I should have said that. Not obviously if you know nothing about Brawl. It is a singleton format, and one of the reasons it's easier than building a standard deck is because you can only run one of each card. So if there's a particularly powerful rare or mythic you'd like for your deck, instead of needing to acquire 4 of them, you only need 1. And that is why if you've only done a couple drafts or maybe bought a box, it's much easier to put a Brawl deck together than say, here's a $10 mythic. That's in the deck I want to be playing. I've got to spend $40 on just these 4 cards. You can say, okay, I'll get this card I need because I only need 1. And because it's multiplayer, it can be a little more casual, and it's a little easier to win with lower powered cards when you're playing in multiplayer because more things come into it. So that is Brawl, and we'll get into the format that spawned Brawl, Commander, a little bit further on. But I feel like the best step to go to next would be Pioneer. Who wants to talk about Pioneer?
I can. All right, Dave, you do it. You're more qualified. We can't hear you, Dave.
Because I moved to push to talk because I'm an idiot. Oh no, I've already done one. Your turn. I'll grab.
I did too at the beginning, and I think we're the 2 most qualified to talk about it.
We'll do it in tandem. How about that?
Every other word.
All right. So Pioneer. Pioneer started with Return to Ravnica. So it is a format that does not actually rotate. It is not, and it's not exactly an eternal format, but the idea is it is going to.
We should talk about, so eternal formats are formats that have that's actually not what eternal means, but so Pioneer is the non-rotating format, which means the card pool is always static, unlike Standard and Limited and Brawl, where it changes every so often. sorry, that's an important, it's vocabulary that we use that we don't think about. It's just something like you said it, we need to explain it. So go ahead, Dave. I'm so sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. It was one quick thing that JC still had on Brawl.
Oh, I just wanted to point out that the sets that we've talked about so far, because we're going to be moving into other formats. So the formats we've talked about so far are the formats that's easiest to buy product for. That you will most frequently find a product in big box stores as well as card stores that they will have the most in stock of. That they've actually put out some pretty good Brawl decks recently. So it is one of those things where if you're not very eBay savvy or very secondary market savvy or anything like that, the sets that we've talked about so far, the limited, the draft and standard and Brawl, are the formats that are easiest to acquire product for in easy ways. Now we're going to be moving into sets where you have to move into kind of more secondary market things that may be a little harder to get product for.
Yeah,
On a similar note to that, JC, there are also the formats that you will continue to need to buy more.
True.
And a lot. This is actually a good point. A lot of people will start with standard and then move on to the older formats as their cards rotate out, and that's kind of the intention. So as your deck rotates out of standard, maybe you can use some of those cards in Pioneer. So okay, I think that's a good vocab break. Dave, are you good to pick us back up on Pioneer?
Absolutely. So Pioneer, the cutoff point is Return to Ravnica onwards. It has its own ban list. And that's essentially the extent of it. The ban list started as being just fetch lands, and they went to see where to go from there. If you want to know what is currently banned or restricted, you can check the homepage, WotC's homepage, and we'll put a link in the show description afterwards. But that's really all there is to it. That it's a certain point that they chose to have another format where someone that might have been playing for a while, but not quite as long as since Mirrodin or 8th edition, or since Legends or Ice Age, that may not have that card pool, but still wants to play with some of their older cards. That's where Pioneer goes into. That's what we have with Pioneer, at least.
It's also a pretty new format. It just recently came into being. So we can touch on this a little more when we talk about Modern next, but it was kind of meant to take the place as like the middle ground format between standard and one of the more popular older formats that people play.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. And yeah, it came out this year still. Came out, or did it come out 2019?
Last year.
2019. So it came out late 2019, that's right. They picked a period of time. They picked Return to Ravnica, and they're like, all right, this is the set going forward. So that's the decks are still cheaper in that format. Now there's some pricey ones, but the cards are all able to be reprinted. There are some cards that Wizards has promised to no longer reprint, but those are only in the older format. So Pioneer is something that is something they are capable of reprinting all these cards for, and it is something they are aiming to make available in Magic Arena in the long term. This year, they will start putting out Pioneer Masters sets on Magic Arena that will slowly bring the cards into that format, which is pretty exciting. I like Pioneer. It's the most recent paper tournament I've been involved in, so I'm liking the format. It's a little bit weird right now, but all formats are a little bit weird right now because Ikoria just came out and they made some cards. But we've talked about that a lot. So, any final thoughts on Pioneer? Or do we want to move on to Modern?
I think Historic is the next.
I was going to cover Historic with Legacy.
I think Modern is a good place. If we're moving out from the kind of smaller card pools to larger card pools, maybe we should move in that direction, because
I think we should do all the whatever Modern next. That's fine. We're not going
to. Who wants to do Modern? I'm trying to think of the. Lily, you want to do Modern? Because
yeah. Oh yeah. So So Modern started 8th edition onward. Yes. With the new card borders, which is why it's called Modern. Well, they're not the new card borders, but when you went from Onslaught block to 8th edition, the card borders changed to something that resembles what they look like today. It's not exactly the same. The change in Khans of Tarkir, right, was a little more minor, but they.
Oh, that was where they added in like the foil stamp,
right, and the tapered bottom.
Yes.
Right, and they shrunk the border size. But
font, right?
yeah, and Bellerin, the font. But
I like that you called out the font there. Nice.
Yeah, I remember it.
Last name.
But it's a good font name too, I will say. But so Modern started when the you shifted from the not the oldest border, but kind of the classic border, which the game had had for a lot of its life, to a more contemporary modern card game looking border. And there were some design elements that sort of got solidified in that era too. They had started really the game design kind of took on a different face as well. So they, at that point, 8th edition onward, they decided this is going to be a format. Now this is also, this and Historic are the last two non-eternal formats. So what that is they don't contain cards from every Magic set that has been printed. So Modern would have been about 2005.
Before that, it would be like 2002 or so.
Okay, whatever. It was 8th edition. Was whenever 8th edition came out, right? That's probably right.
Well, the format came into being after that point.
Right. It was created after that point, but that's when the format starts. The card pool starts.
Yes, that's when the card pool.
And Modern was originally created to kind of fill a niche between Standard and another format we're going to talk about in a second called Legacy, which as sort of a more affordable, not beholden to the mistakes of the past format that was more, people can get into and play without having to have been playing for, the previous 10 years. Mm-hmm. Problem is, Modern was created a long time ago, and by now we're seeing the same thing happen with Modern and Pioneer.
Modern decks are pretty pricey. The card availability is low, and that runs those prices higher on certain cards, particularly of land availability. However, one advantage to Modern is, or one thing that to keep in mind too, is Modern also includes no cards that can't be reprinted. Wizards of the Coast is allowed or willing to reprint any card in Modern.
Are they though?
Well, no, they're not willing to, but they can.
They're not legally obligated to not.
Yeah,
they might not reprint Oko.
That's a different topic. Reprint fetch lands, you cowards. Any final thoughts on Modern before we go into the eternal format?
Pleasant Kenobi in that?
No, I'm with Pleasant Kenobi.
No, cite him.
Yes. Him? As Pleasant Kenobi says, reprint fetch lands, you cowards.
I think that's a good point that you made about how it is not an eternal format and it has an end date and there's a more limited card pool before we move on to kind of more eternal formats and that they're willing to reprint anything. I do think it is important to say, though, that like 8th edition was in 2003, so that's getting really long in the tooth.
It is.
Oh, it
was like mid-high school.
Yeah, that was middle of school for me, but I remember those cards. I bought the Thorn Elemental starter set, so.
No, that was 7th edition.
That was 7th. Okay.
Everybody has that foil Thorn Elemental like chilling in a box somewhere.
Yes.
I do.
5th edition was Elvis Champion.
I'm gonna tell a story in the post show about that.
What I had.
Okay, mine was that 7th edition. Anyway, a tiny asterisk. We've been citing standard sets or sets that were standard at one point that these old formats. So Pioneer is Return to Ravnica on, Modern is 8th edition on. Modern also includes a set called Modern Horizons, which was a supplemental product, which typically are not allowed in standard, Pioneer, and Modern, but they specifically designed it for Modern, so that Wizards is starting to dabble in some interesting ways to inject cards into formats without their traditional way of printing it into standard and running it through the normal rotation process into those formats. So just wanted to throw out there just because technically it's 8th edition on and Modern Horizons, and any future sets they decide to say are also legal in Modern. Because that's money.
And as we've seen consistently with Wizards of the Coast, whenever they try something new, it has absolutely no unintended consequences, and they make no mistakes, and it doesn't ruin any amount of formats for any amount of time. So good on Watts to keep it up.
Nothing bad happened with Modern Horizons.
Nothing at all. I can't think of a single Hogat that happened.
Very quickly, Tolarian Community College had a designer on and we're talking about modern design, and they made a crack about Modern Horizon ruined so many formats. Like, they had to ban so many things. The sad look on I can't think of which R&D member, but the look of pure sadness and defeat and frustration when they made that joke was so intense. Oh, Wizards knows what they did. Oh boy. Anyway, that's the sidetrack. So God, we're so far into the show. This is a huge topic.
I told you it was a whole show topic.
Why didn't anyone say this topic was so involved?
It's fine. We can. I mean, as far as what we had for the other topics and all that, like this is fine.
Okay. I mean, I'm enjoying this, and honestly, I'm so frustrated of seeing players post. It's not. It's. I often see players on Reddit in particular say, "I'm new. How do I play? I'm new. How do I play?" And so I've been meaning to get some stuff together, and like I want to write out some good ways to get in. And so this is actually a
not Commander
overview of this. We're actually at a really good point. Why don't we take a commercial break?
Let's
this might
do
be the
historic and then commercial.
Historic and then commercial.
Historic's the last non-eternal format.
Fair enough. So, historic's pretty easy, sort of. Historic is a Magic Arena only format. It is all of the cards available on Magic Arena. So when rotation started happening on Arena, Pioneer wasn't a thing yet, and Modern, as such a large card pool, they needed to come up with a format that was all of the cards on Arena, so you could do something with your old cards. They basically said, so all of the cards that rotate out in the first rotation are going to be legal and historic, and then we're going to just pick some cards and put them into the game because we can do that. So historic is the cards that have been in standard since Arena has come out of beta, and some other cards.
Right, added via fiat.
And they decide they'd be interesting. They've been trying to add some articles. They've been they've been trying to add some different decks to the format. They've just been like, hey, here's 20 cards. They do that at this point. They are doing it quarterly. We're going to get some new cards into Arena in just a couple weeks, which is kind of exciting. As the format grows, it's going to kind of be its own weird little beast. But yeah, it's not really played in paper at the moment, although I suppose someday it could be if somebody wanted to do it. I don't think it can be sanctioned in paper, but there's nothing stopping them from saying it could be done. It'd be hard. It's tricky to say what cards are legal because it's like go look on Arena, I guess, or here's a large list.
We get into a lot of the same problems they had with Pauper because it seemed like I think it was the professor or someone. I assume it's the professor because it had something to do with Pauper. But
yeah,
what arbitrary distinctions they had is this. So we have this common card that's legal, but this common card's not. And it was printed in this common set, but it never was in paper. And it's really convoluted what's legal and what's not.
Right.
Yeah.
But Pauper's an eternal format.
And so, yeah, we'll cover Pauper,
Sure is.
Pauper and the other eternal formats. After the commercial break, we're going to take a quick commercial break to have a word from our sponsors, and we'll be back to talk about more formats. Stick around.
This week's sponsor is Nuclear Ink Custom Tattoo and Skate Shop. At Nuclear Ink, you will find a very inclusive environment with artists that share your interest in nerd culture and fandoms alike. Nuclear Ink prides themselves in being Omaha's premier all-custom tattoo shop. So if you're looking to get a custom tattoo, please check out Nuclear Ink here in Omaha, Nebraska. A link will be in the description down below. We're also sponsored by InkedGaming.com. Are you looking to get a custom playmat? Well, then we suggest you check out InkedGaming.com. They have custom playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, and so much more. They even recently added a stitch option to their playmat and mouse pads as well. Stop those frayed edges from happening. Inked Gaming lets you play your game with your style. And if you want to get 10% off of your entire order, use the code TCG University, all caps, no spaces at checkout, and help support us by customizing your game to your style. Cards Custom Builds. Are you into cosplay? Looking to get into cosplay? Do you want to show up to events dressed as your favorite character? Well, then Cards Custom Build can help. Cards Custom Build creates everything from cosplay accessories like props, trinkets, or weaponry, all the way up to full-blown costumes. Do you want to make a perfectly flowing cloth, or maybe want rigid battle armor? Cards Custom Build has you covered. Their work is guaranteed to make you the talk of the con. So go over to Cards Custom Build on either Facebook or on their Etsy account. Links will be in the description down below. And make sure you mention TCG University to get 5% off your entire order. And lastly, the show is brought to you by Dex Protection. Dex Protection is on a never-ending pursuit to create the highest quality storage and protection accessories. Their design and innovation comes from die-hard gamers and collectors just like you. They're constantly taking in feedback from their customers, and they have no plans to stop their innovations or their drive to refine the products until they're recognized as a leader in their industry. They make terrific products, all with the avid gamer and collector in mind. So go ahead and check them out. The link will be in the description down below.
welcome back, everybody. We still have plenty of formats to cover, so we are going to jump right back into the action. So now we are on the Eternal formats, the formats that include cards from all of the printed Magic sets with a couple asterisks.
So yeah, the distinction is they contain cards from every Magic set. They do not contain every card that's been in Magic.
I think that's the best way. Yep, that's a very good way to put it. So I think we're gonna do. It's hard to. You kind of want to talk about Legacy and Vintage at the same time.
So I think Legacy is the splitting off point into all the other Eternal formats.
Okay, so do you want to cover Legacy, Lily?
Okay. So Legacy. So Legacy for a while. Legacy was Type 1, right, Dave?
No,
Legacy was Type 1.5.
Right. Okay. So Legacy was one of the first couple formats. And essentially, Legacy contains most Magic cards. The only cards that are not in it, it does have a ban list to maintain the health of the format. Health in that format means something very different than it does in Modern or Pioneer or Standard. But Legacy is the format that has the most different decks that are all viable.
Yes, I think that's generally a fair assessment of the format. It is basically, simply put, it's every card with a pretty significant ban list. So any card that goes into standard printing, any supplementally printed products. We mentioned Modern Horizons, if they print Commander decks, or if they just print like a unique side product like Battle Bond. Battle Bond doesn't go into standard, so it's not in Pioneer or it's on Modern. Battle Bond cards are in Legacy and other sets like Plane Chase, supplemental things that come out on various times of the year.
Cards by default, when they are printed, are legal in Legacy, irrespective of what thing they were printed in.
And Legacy actually is younger than Standard, because Type 1 was all of the cards, and so that's Standard, and I think we're gonna talk more about Legacy. Standard, oh my god, my brain, it's not working. That's Legacy. We're gonna talk a little more about Legacy, but I want to introduce Vintage because I think Vintage is an important part of the discussion. Dave, do you want to talk about Vintage?
Absolutely. So Vintage is essentially Legacy, but you get to play with all the busted fun cards like Ancestral Recall and Black Lotus and Time Walk. The idea is they instead of banning cards, they'll restrict cards. As of this moment in time, they don't ban cards unless they reference manual dexterity or anti, or as was just pointed out by my live studio audience, conspiracies. Those are also not legal in that format. And Scheherazade, which Lily talked about earlier.
Twice.
In the pre-show.
Multiple times. Yeah. Scheherazade, whatevs.
Can you say that again, JC? I'm sorry.
Oh, it's kind of a spiritual card for our show as well.
Yeah.
That was my Scheherazade.
But Dave, you're on busted cards.
So yeah, the trade-off for that is instead of banning cards, they'll restrict cards. So you get to play Ancestral Recall, but you only get to play one. And you can play Brainstorm, but you only get to play one Brainstorm. Same with Ponder. So a lot of these cards are restricted, which the idea is your consistency goes down. So you get to play these, but you probably don't get to play them every single game.
And on topic, so those are the available card pools. It's the Vintage has the largest available card pool of any format, and then Legacy is either second or third. We'll get to Commander in just a moment. But how do you get into Legacy and Vintage? The answer to that is you spend a lot of money, or you've been playing consistently for over 20 years. Those are the ways you get into those formats.
The old argument that was used for that was that you have that barrier to entry as far as cost goes. So actual old school dual lands cost a bunch of money. Forcibles cost a bunch of money. Aether Vials, all these different cards that see a lot of play in Legacy, but you only have to buy them once. And once you have them, then you have them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not a great argument now.
Brett. Oh, yeah. Jason, go. Sorry.
Oh, I just also wanted to point out these are formats that are very good if you're interested in the history of Magic. If you're interested in like if you are one of those people out there who like, I have money It's around. I'm fine with it. And you really like Magic for its long, rich history and the amount of cards in it and the rule changes it's gone through and the various mechanics it's gone through. These are very good formats to basically learn the richness and depth of Magic.
Mm-hmm. And something I was talking beforehand about Wizards can reprint everything in
I was just about to say.
Perfect. That was what I thought I think you might have been getting onto. So everything we covered pre-commercial break, Wizards can reprint those cards. There's a thing called the reserve list. We have talked about it before. I'm sure we'll talk about it again. There was a point where Wizards said we are going to create a list of cards and promise to never reprint these cards. Quite a few of the best and most important cards for these formats, Legacy and Vintage, are on the reserve list. So, that is a big part of why their cost is so high. Wizards cannot reprint them, or is unwilling to, again, separate topic. But those cards are unavailable for reprints. So some of these cards are literally hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Dual lands, or even the cheaper printings of the dual lands, the ones that came later than the first two printings, Alpha and Beta, some of them are up to $300, $400, $500 a piece.
Was not the case 4 years ago.
No, it is not. Those cards on the reserve list have gone up quite a bit, and so that is a barrier to entry for these formats. Now, if you want to play on Magic the Gathering online, the reserve list does not exist there, so if you do want to play Vintage or Legacy, there are still some pricey cards on Magic Online, but decks are generally cheaper there. So there are some still accessible ways to play these formats without having to spend a large amount of money. I also wanted to say, these are particularly fun formats to watch. Star City Games used to do Legacy tournaments weekly and cast them. And it's a shame they don't do those anymore because, as Lily said, there's a lot of very viable decks in Legacy, and Vintage is a hoot to watch because
oh my gosh,
they do some real crazy shit in Vintage.
I mean, Legacy is Legacy is pretty impressive in and of itself. I mean,
I've had the opportunity to play. One time I had a standard deck and someone at the shop I was in had Vintage Dredge and said, do you want to see how Vintage Dredge works? And I said, sure. And I got to watch Bazaar of Baghdad in action. And holy shit. I don't remember who that was. I don't think so. I don't even remember if that was an Omaha or in Kearney. I don't know if it was Krypton.
That was Kearney. I remember when it happened. I don't remember who you played against.
But I got the opportunity to get rolled by Vintage Dredge, which was a delight. So
yeah, there's an answer for that, and it's just turn 0 ley line. But I mean, there are
yeah.
You take your shit. I don't even know what ley line's up to now, but I'm sure that it's a bunch even with the reprint recently.
Yeah, that's a pricey.
Loris.
Oh, Loris. But yeah, so that's Vintage Legacy. Go, JC, go ahead.
Oh, I also want to just make a quick note that if you are one of those people that is interested in the value of Magic cards or investing in Magic cards, we are not going to get into that. But these are the formats where those cards exist. I will point you over to Alpha Investments. Enjoy.
Or
don't
go there. Get a 401k. I totally lost my train of thought.
Commander.
Well, we're going to go to Commander. One reality of Vintage and Legacy is it can be hard to find paper tournaments for them. Some different parts of the country and parts of the world have them. I believe there's actually a decent Legacy scene in Seattle. I think there's a couple East Coast cities that have pretty good Legacy.
I mean,
but
probably not right now.
Nobody has a good scene right now. But if you're like, man, Vintage and Legacy sound like the thing for me, I want to do that in paper, you are going to need to accept that you are going to have to travel to play large events. It is not going to be easy to find a community to play those formats with, generally speaking. So, any thoughts on Vintage or Legacy? I think we're going to move on to Commander.
Yeah, Vintage and Legacy have the biggest learning curve for learning to play the formats, because whereas like Standard, you're kind of learning to play your deck as best you can. Getting into Modern, you're playing against your opponent more. In Vintage and Legacy, you're playing against like every conceivable thing your opponent could be doing, and you have to know how their deck plays as well as yours does to actually compete against them. It has the highest skill cap of any format.
And particularly in, like, let's say Legacy, if you don't know what your opponent's doing and you just let them do it, they might just kill you on turn 2.
Or 1.
Or 1, and it can happen. Yeah, turn 1 kills exist in both Vintage and Legacy. So that's not always, and some people, I think there's a bad this bad illusion that, oh, they're all these combo turn 1 kills. There's all sorts of decks in Legacy in particular. Vintage is weird, and I don't know enough about it to say much, but there's control decks, aggro decks, combo decks, tempo decks. Legacy's got it all. It's
If you're
a
gonna
really
play
cool
Legacy,
format.
you best learn the mulligan.
Yeah.
What I would say as far as Legacy and Vintage are concerned, if anyone did want to get into that, what I would highly recommend would be downloading MTGO, even though it's not a great program, as we've gone over a couple of times. But the difference between the cost of a dual land in real life and a dual land on Moto is night and day. If you want to play Legacy or Vintage, that's the way to do it, because you don't have to take a second mortgage out to do it.
Yep. You can get a Black Lotus on Magic Online without having to, without the same amount of money as, say, like a small 4-door sedan. So, yeah. Magic Online's a great place to do that. JC, do you want to talk to us about Commander?
I do. Commander is also an Eternal format, but it's more of a casual format. Is officially titled by Wizards as Commander, but is also known as Elder Dragon Highlander or EDH. Usually it's played in multiplayer format, so not really 1v1, though you can play it 1v1. It has, just like Brawl, a special kind of card called a Commander that exists in the command zone and lets you play a legendary or commander in that thing, and you have to share the color identity, just as we talked about with it. The thing about it, that it does have some cards from nearly every format in it. It has its own independently maintained ban list. I think it's a pretty healthy format, and also it's a format that is more casual in regards to the amount of money that people spend on it. I think people spend a lot of money on it, but I don't think they spend Legacy money on it.
You don't have to.
You don't
I
have
think that's
to,
the best way.
and I don't think people generally do.
It is also of note that of every format we've talked about so far, Commander is the first one that was not Wizards of the Coast was not involved until it had already become quite popular.
Yes, it was created by the fans, as JC said, is an independently maintained ban list. I do want to throw one quick note in. In Brawl, you can have a legendary creature or planeswalker. In Commander, it needs to be a legendary creature, except for a few planeswalkers that can specifically be your commander.
Like in all these cases, the rules written on the card supersede the rules of the game in the format.
Yeah, but that's a slight difference on that, and that is not a decision Wizards can make because it is an the rules and ban list is independently controlled, and like Jason
Which
said,
I think is. Yeah, it's an interesting thing about Commander. It is sanctioned by Wizards of the Coast, but it is not controlled by Wizards of the Coast.
Mm-hmm. And you can do a Commander tournament. It is you can do official Commander tournaments, even with multiplayer, 1-on-1. Wizards has absolutely embraced it. It is one of their biggest cash cows. We're in the year of Commander at the moment. 5 Commander decks, pre-constructed Commander decks are coming out tomorrow. If you're watching this live, coming out on May 15th in paper in the West. We are also expecting 2 more Commander decks when Zendikar comes out, and then 2 additional Commander decks and an entire draftable Commander set coming out this fall. There's a lot of Commander stuff. Wizards is printing a ton of stuff. One of my formats of choice, and like JC said, it's not it does not have to be Legacy deck expensive. How to get into Commander? This is another one. It can be nice and cheap. You can put together whatever cards you have laying around, since it's generally played multiplayer and is a bit more casual. You can generally get away with playing less optimized decks, less optimized cards, and JC, you said actually a really interesting thing. You said you think the format's really healthy, and I would agree. But the reason that the format is healthy is because we've all generally agreed to not do that much busted stuff, or if we're going to discuss it beforehand. Commander is a social format that's very much about having a social contract. And so Rule 0, as said by the Rules Committee, is that a conversation should happen before you play with a play group to discuss the kind of power level and things that are going to be going on, which is not how generally Magic works. Go ahead, Lily.
Like in all things, consent and setting expectations before y'all get going.
Very true.
And that's actually one thing I wanted to expand on a little bit. Like the reason I say it's a healthy format is not like it has a big card pool, and you can do some ridiculous shit in Commander for sure. But the fact of the matter is it's typically played as a multiplayer game, so that mitigates some of the ridiculous things that you can do because it's not 1v1. Also, because it's a multiplayer game, because it's a casual game and it's a game that a lot of people play with their friends, and that is sanctioned by Wizards but not maintained by Wizards as far as the ban list and the legality and things that matter. I really think it's a format that has a social contract, like Brett was saying. It is inherently healthy because people have decided that they don't want Commander to be a busted thing.
Absolutely. And I do want to make sure, I think we covered it, but it is a singleton format, so only one of each card except basic lands, and it has the same color identity rules as Brawl, and it's Brawl, where Brawler cards are 60 card decks, Commander decks or EDH decks are 100 card decks. We're running a little long. There's one more format I definitely want to make sure we cover, and that's Pauper. Dave,
you don't want to talk about Canadian Highlander?
I was going to say
Highlander is a myth. That is not a real thing. No one owns power.
Or Tiny Leaders or Oathbreaker. There's so many niche formats.
There's some niche formats. And sorry, go ahead, Dave.
So Pauper, it has a weird list as far as what's legal and what's not. The best way to check to see whether or not it's legal is check and gather. Is it on Gather?
Yes, it's officially on Gather. They gave us a unified ban list quite recently.
Excellent, because I know that I was going on that tirade earlier, and the person that told me about that, Shannon, is one of my visitors currently. So, but the short version for that is Lily says hi. The short version for Pauper is if it's common, you can play it. There is a ban list for it because certain things have been proven to be hella degenerate, like Cloud Post. That's a thing, obviously, that's busted. Anything with the word storm on it, I think with maybe the exception of Gravestorm and whatever the green one was.
The life gain one's legal.
What's up?
The green life gain one's legal.
Oh, yeah. Warping the format, clearly.
I don't know.
It's actually a deck, I think.
Probably. I wouldn't be surprised if it's just one of those griefer, like, I'm going to gain 1 million life, kill me, I dare you.
I mean, I think it actually is a thing. Again, I'm not super in touch with Pauper, but yeah. So, and I think that, like Dave said, there used to be some confusion on what was available due to paper and online. The current rule is if it has been printed at common, digitally, or in paper, it is legal in the format.
Digital too.
And I think it's implied in the name of Pauper, but I think the point of it is that it's supposed to be not expensive, and it's supposed to be playing with more of the card base that you see in common and stuff like that. Like, so it is more jank and chaff cards and stuff like that. That being said, there's been a lot of commons that are really good, and it is an eternal list, so it ends up being a pretty high level play thing.
It is a very competitive format.
And so some of the decks are very cheap because they're all commons. There are a few strange cards that are either on the reserve list or that just haven't been reprinted, like Oubliette.
Sorry to interrupt. If it's a common, it can't be on the reserve list. Those are specifically rares.
Oh, there you go.
Some weird printing uncommon that's technically now rare. But things like Oubliette's not on the reserve list. That was a common.
It just doesn't fit on a card of modern templating.
Apparently, we're going to get it in the next year. We're going to get a reprint. But so that sorry, Dave, I cut you off a little bit. Anything else on Pauper? I don't know a ton about the format, to be totally honest.
It's like Gurmag. I was just told by the audience that Gurmag Angler is a problem, and I'm not going to dispute that at all. Like Delve in general was a problem. As it turns out, cheap spells are a problem.
Has there been a single cost reduction mechanic that hasn't been problematic?
One more time, sorry.
Has there been a single cost reduction mechanic that has not been problematic?
That is an excellent point. I think, like, Tombstalker, I think, is the only thing that really had that. Well, I mean, like, if
Improvise was fine, right?
Specific cards, but you're right. Cost reduction was a mistake. In any
Convoke
way,
is fine. Convoke's fine.
Convoke?
Convoke's fine. Anyway, we're getting off topic. Yes, Convoke's fine. Okay, but so those are the main formats we're going to focus in on. As Lily alluded to, there are various other community-made ones. Canadian Highlander. There's another Highlander that's also fairly popular. I can't think of what it is.
There's just Highlander.
Highlander, Canadian Highlander, Gladiator, Tiny Leaders, Oathbreakers.
I think the preferred nomenclature for Highlander is Singleton now because
Right.
Yeah, because wizards can't use Highlander.
Like, this
because
is the part of Fiddler on the Roof where he just starts like listing off people and is like, I don't need to explain these people.
Yes, we're at the point where he sold him a horse but thought he bought a mule. We're at that point in tradition, audience. There's that deep musical cut for you. But those are the formats we're going to cover. There are others. We'll do a topic at some point about weird ancillary formats and their evolution.
I would love to do that. That sounds so much fun. And why they die.
And why they died. There's actually a super great episode of Dies to Removal that the Professor and Pleasant Kenobi did, where they kind of go into formats like that and how they die. If you're interested in these weird formats, I would recommend you check that out. Before we wrap this up, Tam has several questions. So we're going to do a little mini roundtable with a secret surprise guest. Tam, what are your questions?
Okay, so this was answered a little bit because I actually was, paying attention to the podcast. Where the first question that I had to ask whenever I was doing this whole thought is, let's say that I am the biggest Spike. I am all I want to do is just show off my skill. Lily, you said that the most skill-intensive format is Eternal, correct?
So the most skill-intensive format is probably Legacy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Vintage doesn't have high enough consistency for. I would say that the best Magic players that exist are good Legacy players.
What about Pauper?
I was going to say that, like, if you're trying to get into Magic as someone who likes to be competitive, start with Pauper.
But Pauper is less complicated than Legacy just because the power level's lower. So there certainly are some weird commons, but you are not pushing up at that crazy high power level.
It's just as cutthroat.
It's just as cutthroat, but I'd say a little less complicated.
Maybe this is comparing apples to oranges, but the note that I actually had written down was, what about Legacy versus Draft in skills, right? Since with Legacy and Eternal, there is the barrier of entry of, we could say, your wallet, but with Draft, everybody gets those same 6 packs, right? Do you think it's possible that because of the fact that everybody has to start on the same footing of it's the randomness in the packs that you get, is there an opportunity to think of, like, how is Draft more skill intensive than Eternal, or could an argument be made there?
JC.
If you don't mind if I start on this, I think they're different skills. So I think Draft is a lot of skill of recognizing what's good when you see it, and like reading through a card and understanding Magic well enough on a base level to go, this will work, and try to build a strategy like around synergizing like what you might see and stuff like that, and leaving your options open. Where I feel like Legacy is more of a skill of like having a lot available to you and recognizing combo potential and deck building potential and overall cohesiveness potential. So I think if I'm relating this to like football or something like that, like drafting is really like looking over your current college recruits and recruiting out of college on who could be really good for what you're doing right now. And Legacy is like fantasy football, where you just have everything available to you and you're looking through everything.
That's fair.
It is worth mentioning, Tam, that on the whole, Legacy players have to worry about more different cards in their format than players who are drafting.
Yeah. And there's draft is generally done at the highest level tournament play. So when they do Worlds and other big tournaments, generally those tournaments will begin with a drafting portion. And I would say, yes, they're both complicated. Drafting is its own set of skills, but once the deck has been drafted, there's only, like I said earlier, 260 unique game pieces. So
there's maybe 15 different archetypes in a given limited set.
Exactly. So there's 15 archetypes, 16 unique, 260 unique pieces. It's a lot easier to hold that once you've got your deck constructed. So signaling, all of those really high level complex draft stuff, that is a very intense skill to develop, and the highest level players drafting is very interesting. But yeah, Legacy, there's so many decks, there's so many interactions, there's so many things you need to be ready for. And also building a Legacy deck, when you're deciding what deck do I bring to this tournament, yeah, there's archetypes but there's so many weird, unique things that you can really kind of break the metagame or break the tournament completely on what you bring. So I'd say Legacy is still probably more complicated, but Draft certainly has its unique, complicated challenges.
The other thing I want to bring up when it comes to price, like draft, yeah, you don't need to come with any cards, but drafting to the extent that you would need to become very good at it is expensive.
That's
Or
fair.
time consuming.
I think it's an interesting thing to talk about it as in drafting. I feel like has both a low skill floor and a high skill ceiling, where I feel like Legacy has a pretty high skill floor and a pretty high skill ceiling.
I think it's an incredible way to put it. Absolutely.
So as far as draft,
I don't
versus-
agree with Legacy having a low skill floor or having a high skill floor.
Really?
Like, it's really easy to be bad. Like to just not understand how the format's played.
I mean, that's fair. But like, I'm talking about, I guess
on
I say like a
competency.
minimal viable skill floor. Like you could play and do okay. Kind
I
of
think
floor.
that's fair. I think it's a new player going to a legacy tournament is way more likely to get stomped than a new player going to an 8-man draft at the local
Exactly.
store.
Well, I mean, that would mean draft has a higher skill floor than Legacy. Floor is the worst someone could be not knowing what they're doing. Ceiling is the best they could be knowing.
I'm saying it's easier to come in and do well at a draft.
Right,
The
right.
floor is
So
lower.
draft has a higher. No, the floor is higher.
Okay, then I did cement.
High
Okay,
skill floor means it's harder to do poorly. Think of it like how low could you go? A high skill floor means you can't be below the floor.
okay,
That's fair.
okay. Fair enough. Dave, you were going to say something.
as far as like the difference between skill, whichever one's more difficult, legacy or draft, which one's more skill intensive? That's the phrase. I think a lot of it's going to depend on what draft format you're talking about. The things you could bring up immediately, like maybe less so playing the 40. I think it has to be like 41, 42, 42 Forest Lost in the Woods.
40 Forest Lost.
40 Forest Lost in the Woods, or 39 Swamp Pack Rat. Now, Pack Rat's probably the bigger offender because if you open a Pack Rat, you're going to win that draft, especially with how the Mulligan rules are. If you play that right, then you should win the draft. You may not win every game, but you should win every match. That takes a lot of the skill out of it. When your skill turns into turn 2, play this card, turn 3, and the remainder of the game, play another Rat Lord. Oops, I won.
Yeah.
But then you also have other formats like I'm trying to think of a good skill-intensive one, like Cons Block. It's what's being shouted at me.
Oh, we
Cons
didn't
Block
talk about block
is skill-intensive,
constructed.
and Return to Ravnica.
Block constructed's not a thing. We're not talking about it.
Or extended.
Urban Legend, same as Canadian Highlander. We all know Canada doesn't exist.
Fair. Okay, Tam, we were going long, so some more questions.
Okay. This is an easy one. Why is it called EDH? Eternal or
Dragon
Ethereal-
Highlander.
Elder Dragon Highlander.
Elder Dragon Highlander. Where did that come from? Who was like, hey, let's make this complicated?
Man,
So it's Highlander because there can be only one. So the singleton.
yes.
And Elder Dragon because of the Elder Dragon cycle from Legends. There are three. They're the 3 color shard
Yes.
dragon. So they just named it after those.
Okay.
Oh, no,
I
it's not
totally
just that.
understood Highlander. I didn't get the Elder
The only
Dragon.
approved commanders
Yeah.
when the format started.
In the
That's what
initial
they-
conception, it was just those 3. Or
Interesting.
5, excuse me.
Yes.
I dig that.
Bolus and the rest.
Bolus and the rest who died.
Are there events for each of these formats that are quote unquote sanctioned by Wizards? Like, could I go to a large event and play these extra formats?
Yes.
A lot of them, yeah. You're going to have side events at pretty much any Grand Prix when Grand Prix get to happen again. Like they'll have EDH pods, they'll have Modern, they'll have Pioneer, even if it's not what the format is for the Grand Prix.
Yep,
With legitimate prize support?
Yes.
That's right.
Every
Is
format
there-
we mentioned. Oh, go ahead, JC.
Commander.
Yes. So it's a little. So every format we listed, let's say at a Magic Fest or a big event, you could expect a store or a vendor could sanction any of these tournaments. And using the Wizards Event Reporter program, Commander is able to be sanctioned. So Planeswalker points are dead, but you can officially use the tournament software to track it. For Commander. Now, generally, you don't do a bracketed Commander Swiss tournament. You'll do multiplayer pods, and there is generally still prize support of some kind. Maybe it's just participation support. But every format we outlined in its own little topic can be sanctioned and played at any event. Any store in town could sanction any one of these tournaments if they wanted to tomorrow. Well, excluding pandemic.
That's very cool. That's very cool. Okay, my last question, and this is leading just a little bit, but are there lessons to be learned, different lessons to be learned via different formats? Like, if I want to get good at this X, Y, and Z thing, should I go play this format? And then
Yes.
What's the briefest synopsis, since we're like an hour and 15 into this podcast, of like what could you learn per format? Like, maybe each of you take a format and give me a thing you could learn.
I got draft. Draft is card evaluation.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. Lily, you go next because Jason.
I just want to take standard real quick. Standard gets you into deck building.
I think that's it's a great starter place for deck building because it's a limit. There's a lot of cards, but there's not a lot of cards.
Legacy Vintage, as I said before, teaches you to mulligan.
Absolutely. I distinctly remember something to the effect of there's value in a mulligan coming from Tom Wallach.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's
Legacy and Vintage are won and lost on the mulligan.
I absolutely agree with that. And I am going to take Brawl and Commander, and I would say those formats teach you how to actually have fun. I think a lot of times it's easy to, particularly for more enfranchised players, to get a little too competitive. I've slammed my head into the brick wall to get my rank up on Arena, or tried really, really hard in tournaments to get prizes and gotten frustrated. So I think those are the formats to remember, that this is a really fun game that should be played with your friends, and you should have a good time. And so those are the formats that teach you how to have a good time.
That's so wholesome.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't teach you to count to 15.
No, it doesn't. That doesn't come up. They also don't learn that in a 4-year English program at college. So yeah, that they also don't cover that.
Have we ever told that story?
We'll tell them the post show. I'm telling the post show. That's fine. I'm happy to be
all I
embarrassed
had
in the post show. Okay. Anyone
Thank
have
you
any
for
final
indulging
thoughts?
me.
No, that was great. I like that. I like that's a nice little kind of bow on the present that is this podcast. You're welcome.
Way to be, Tam. Those are some good questions. Very, very good active listening.
Anyone final thoughts before we move to the post show, because this is a long show? Okay, I'm going to take silence as we are good to wrap things up. So, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully, this has been informative, and maybe this is one of your first exposures to us. If you're checking this out because you're trying to figure out how to get into Magic, thank you so much for watching. We have a lot of other shows where we cover all sorts of different things. Do follow us if you found us enjoyable, and the biggest thing you can do to help us get around and see more people is if you could just tell somebody. Share somebody a link, get somebody else to watch the show. We really do appreciate that. It's super fun getting new people watching, having people come on stream that are new. It's super fun. We really appreciate all your involvement, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are going to keep talking about embarrassing moments for me, embarrassing card game moments in the post show. That's what we're going to do. And whatever weird conspiracy theories Dave wants to talk about, or conspiracy theorists, I should say.
Maybe.
So that is something to look forward to if you're on the Patreon. Again, $1 a month. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you a week from today, and have a good one. Stay safe out there, and remember who you are.